Hello and welcome to Amnesty International and Fight for the Future's fourth Salon on generative AI, as a part of our work opening the exploration of emerging tech to human rights activists. You can find all of our Salon recordings and info on upcoming events at emergingtechforactivists.com. Next month, we'll be doing AI and accessibility. I'm Leah Holland, Campaigns and Communications Director with Fight for the Future. I use they or she pronouns and I'm based in the Pacific Northwestern US. We have an incredibly important topic on our hands today: AI and inequality. Activists at organizations, including the Algorithmic Justice League, have been working on such issues for many years. In this moment, and with the increasing frequency of conversations like the one we're having, it seems that now the traditionally marginalized people who are being most harmed by AI bias could finally be heard at the highest levels of government, if we keep fighting to ensure that their voices aren't drowned out by the self-interested squabbling of big tech CEOs. These harms are real, these harms are urgent, and we need definitive global action to ensure they do not accelerate. And we've got one heck of a panel here today to talk about them. So Michael Kleinman, Director of the Silicon Valley Initiative at Amnesty International, please take us away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. And as Leah said, beyond thrilled with the panelists that we have here today. And what I'll do is just give a quick overview of who will be speaking in what order, and then we will kick it off. So we will start with Eliza Campbell, she, they, who's the technology and inequality researcher at Amnesty, and who has a report coming out in early October titled Digitally Divided: Technology, Inequality, and Human Rights. And Eliza will give a summary of the briefing and then talk briefly about how inequality is missing from digital human rights spaces, and how labor rights, criminal justice, and migration justice are core to policymakers seeking to get ahead of tech-enabled inequality. Then we'll hear from Amos To, he, him, a senior researcher on artificial intelligence and human rights at Human Rights Watch. And Amos will talk about how algorithms are reshaping public services. We'll then hear from Gabrielle Reduce, she, her, a legal fellow, United for Respect, and the Athena Coalition. And she will speak on AI and labor. And finally, we will hear from Aidan Federline, he, him, a public interest technologist and the Landecker Democracy Fellow at the Alfred Landecker Foundation. And Aidan will speak on predictive analytics and labor squeezing. Without any further ado, I will send it over to Eliza. And actually, I guess there is a further ado. If you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. Leah and I will capture them and make sure that they get asked to the panelists during the Q&A. Thanks, guys. Over to you, Eliza.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really thrilled to be here, and thank you to Michael and Leah from Fight for the Future for organizing this. I'm really excited to talk with my fellow panelists as well, who've been doing really amazing work in this space. So also starting off with a caveat that some of the things that I mentioned, correspond to the report that we have coming out on October 2nd, which I'm really excited to get out into the world and to start this conversation on, but that some of my views may represent my own, because we are in a space that is emerging, where we're all kind of trying to get our head around some of these emerging technologies and still shaping the way forward. So I guess I'll just start off by saying that so my work as a tech and inequality researcher comes in the context of Amnesty Tech's broader work over the past 10 years. It's a relatively recent space and is really rooted in some ways in the beginning issues of the use of surveillance and spyware against journalists and human rights defenders around the world. And I think it's really fitting that that's sort of, in some ways, the beginning of the trajectory of this work, because it's always been the case, and this is a foundational principle of the report, that when it comes to adverse or harmful uses of emerging technology, it always has been the case that first, those harms are rooted in structural and historical and colonial systems of extraction, particularly data extraction, that represent historical and ongoing racial, economic, social inequalities. And I think that has been a conversation that's really been missing from the digital rights space more broadly, and it's catching up with us now in a big way. And the second point that I want to make is that it's always the case that these emerging technologies, whatever it is, the one of the day that we're talking about right now, obviously there's a big kind of chattery news cycle about generative AI, is always the case that the most harmful uses of these technologies are sort of tested on populations first, who have the least margin or window of refusal when it comes to the ways that their data is exposed, to the ways that they're required or have no way to opt out of using these technologies. And so I think these two principles are really crucial. They're ones that scholars like Ruha Benjamin and Safia Noble and a lot of wonderful scholars of color who are working in this space have been leading the way on and pointing towards the harms of for years. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that, yeah, a lot of the work of activists in this space has really been something that I think in many ways in the digital rights space we've been late to and are catching up on. And I think this is particularly the case in the human rights space. The International Human Rights Framework in some ways has not always had a really well-defined approach when it comes to economic and cultural rights as much as it has social and political rights. And I think this has been a major failing, and this is something that also comes up in the report and that I hope that we can have a conversation on as well. And as a result, two of the major harms or the major rights violations that we track in the report are the right to freedom from discrimination and equality, and then the right to decent working conditions, which is something that I think has been pretty absent or at least seriously understudied in the rights community more broadly, which is why I'm so excited to have our fellow panelists here today. And so in some ways, I think I'll just finish my little intro by saying that it's been a historical pattern of making invisible or sort of writing out of existence the extraction that has been at the heart of a lot of today's modern tech industry. And for people in the US and in Europe, for many of us, it's been, a deliberate attempt to sort of make invisible the labor that makes the use of these technologies possible, whether it's content moderators, whether it's the patterns of extraction for just the very metals and materials that are used to make devices, whether it's the laborers kind of working in the so-called ghost work sector who are making a lot of today's generative AI tools possible. And so I hope that we can really start to have a broader conversation that integrates in a lot of sort of more deep and intersectional approaches to inequality into the digital rights sector. And I'm really excited to have this report in the world and to have this conversation with all of you today. And I will stop there.
Eliza, thank you so much. And with that, we'll pass it over to Amos.
Great, thanks so much, Michael. So well before the current hype about AI, governments have always sought to turn to technology to help them streamline the ways in which they deliver public services. And some of these upgrades are actually badly needed, but many of these efforts have become poor substitutes for inclusive social policy. This is particularly pronounced in the area of social protection. Social protection systems, broadly defined, also known as safety net systems or welfare systems in other contexts, are programs and policies that provide a set of individual entitlements that protect against income insecurity throughout people's lives, including common life events such as old age, unemployment, sickness, or childbirth. So at Human Rights Watch, we have actually documented how social protection systems, specifically those that provide cash assistance, have been transformed by technology in ways that harm people's rights. So in the UK, for example, we found that the country's flagship benefits program, Universal Credit, relies on a means testing algorithm that can artificially inflate how much beneficiaries are making, leading to cuts in their benefit. This erratic system has caused people to go hungry and fall into debt. And more recently, in Jordan, we found that a World Bank funded program to provide cash assistance to low-income Jordanians relies on a flawed algorithm to decide who is deserving of support by ranking them from poorest to least poor based on problematic criteria such as the types and value of the assets that they own and the kind of housing that they live in and their living expenses. So we found that this is part of actually a broader effort by the World Bank to finance similar programs in many low and middle income countries. These are problems, we believe, of policy and not technology, and actually require reforms and changes that go beyond kind of tinkering at the edges of correcting technology-related errors or even human rights due diligence. We believe that curtailing problematic technology in social protection systems requires a policy shift in how governments think about and implement social protection. This is why we've partnered with unions and other anti-poverty groups to call for governments and national financial institutions to commit to universal social protection, which really means that benefits and are actually rights, and that things like and they should not be means tested. Instead, they should be provided to people proactively when they reach particular stages in their life where their social and economic rights are particularly at risk. I also noticed that there are many people on this panel that are going to talk about labor rights and the role of workers. And I also want to say that this issue of automating public services is also an issue of worker power. The spread of precarious work and labor rights abuses puts greater strain on social protection systems. And in turn, strained social protection systems and government services make it more difficult for workers to exercise autonomy and agency in the labor market. If they are adequately protected from income insecurity, they might feel less pressure to take on precarious work in order to make ends meet. So with that, I'm going to stop there. I'm looking forward to a broader discussion about this. Thank you.
Amos, thank you so much. And Gabrielle, over to you.
Thank you for having me. Today, I'll be briefly talking about workplace algorithms that automate management and facilitate large-scale surveillance. So AI is exacerbating inequality in the workplace. And when I say algorithms, I'm referring to, or algorithms can be defined as a computer process. So examples of algorithms include the ones that power a calculator, the sorting function in a spreadsheet, or your GPS. Technology evolves over time, but it automates what has long been done. Because of this, the impacts and dangers are familiar. Over time, we have recorded how the introduction of technology in manufacturing shifted power away from workers to their employers. Workers lost the ability to dictate how they worked with the introduction of new technologies, such as the automated looms in the textile industry, or with the introduction of techniques such as the assembly line in automobile factories. As management took control of the work process using technology, they shifted away from relying on skilled workers or ones who were trained in particular trades to dictating tasks to workers. For example, workers in the Ford factory were given a set timetable by which they had to complete their tasks. They were instructed to perform a very limited role in the creation of the Model T. So to clarify, one worker would tighten 3 screws on one car before it moved down the line. One worker, 3 screws on each car produced at the timetable's pace for an entire shift. This meant workers could be easily replaced, especially if they advocated for better working conditions. Today, surveillance and automated management exacerbates this phenomenon. Today, managers can use algorithms to process high volumes of information about workers and their performance collected at a granular level by surveillance technology. Managers use technology to delegate an algorithmically determined quota, increase the pace of work, remove opportunities for workers to negotiate for higher pay, or quality benefits, and discipline workers who do not meet opaque standards. These practices disproportionately impact Black workers and other workers of color, immigrant workers, and workers in low-wage jobs who are excluded from certain protections in the workplace. Without these protections, such as a living wage or the right to organize, managers expose workers to precarious employment and increased physical and mental injuries. It's key to acknowledge that many of these harms very likely would occur without the use of algorithms or automation. But the AI both drastically increases the scope and severity of harm and serves as a distraction from the choices made by human managers, like Amos just mentioned. For that reason, addressing inequality accelerated by AI in the workplace requires both labor and employment law and algorithmic accountability solutions. There needs to be an expansion and transformation of worker protections and algorithmic accountability policies that ensure equitable design, development, and deployment of new technology. Thank you, and again, I look forward to our discussion.
Gabrielle, thank you very, very much. And Aidan, over to you.
Thanks so much. And it's great to be in company with everyone here today. I'm a fellow with the Alfred Landecker Foundation, but I've also been supporting Coworker for the past 2 years in documenting different workplace technologies and the vendors of these tools who have been developing these tools. And I'd like to draw attention to some of the research that I've worked on along with my colleague, Bernardo Negron, on the deployment and use of predictive analytics in the workplace. I mentioned these affiliations just to provide some context as to what I'm drawing my comments from, but my comments are made purely in my personal capacity today. So I agree with everything that Gabrielle just mentioned. And I would argue that our current discourse on the future of work is dominated by an overestimation of the ease of automating jobs, which ignores the skill and knowledge that is involved in many forms of work. Because in the public imagination, we've been overly focused on the potential of automation and job-killing robots, when in reality, the products that we're seeing emerging on the market are not so much about automation, but upon monitoring of workers. And we have documented over 650 different workplace surveillance technologies that are being developed or deployed in the United States. And I'm currently helping to update this research as we try to make it a little more global. We see a huge disconnect between the claims that workers make to their workers about what a tool is for and what employers say to their shareholders or to their managers about the capabilities of a tool. So in practice, while the marketing rhetoric might be around innovation or boosting productivity, these products are, of course, surveillance tools. They spy on workers, they make predictions about workers, and these predictions are acted upon, which is what is most concerning to us. I came across a lengthy article on Wikipedia recently on labor spying in the United States in the 1890s and early 1900s. And it is just uncanny how similar many of the techniques that were used to spy on workers back then have resurfaced in the workplace today in the form of business intelligence software or hardware. The business objectives have not changed. And oftentimes when we imagine what a workplace surveillance tool looks like, we maybe think of workers in Amazon warehouses, picking items, being held to very high performance metrics. And this is, of course, a form of workplace surveillance. But there are many other tools, many more invasive ones being deployed in every sector of the economy. And as Gabrielle mentions, they are disproportionately affecting low-paid workers, immigrant workers, seniors, Black and brown workers, among other individuals. And these tools are not so much about replacing workers or improving productivity, but about taking power away from the workers and giving it back to managers. And speaking personally here, I would be less concerned about true productivity improving tools like those that automate manual labor. Is it safe for an Amazon worker to be packing 200 items an hour into boxes? Probably not. Repetitive strain injuries are skyrocketing. I'd love for that specific task to be automated, but that's not what we see. What we really see when we look at the business intelligence software that is on the market being developed by the likes of Oracle is tools used to detect signs of worker organizing, to aid in union busting, tools to identify worker dissatisfaction, to identify potential workplace violence, tools used to identify cashiers who are using smartphones in the workplace, to look at an online store to potentially identify someone who is going to steal a credit card number or cash or is perceived as engaging in these activities. And it's this kind of workplace productivity monitoring and these kinds of scoring tools that I find most concerning, because aside from the fact that these vendors make very bold claims about the capabilities of their products, we don't know how accurate or reliable these tools are. We just know that they're ranking workers on various metrics. They're using social listening and mood tracking technologies to analyze body language and facial expressions. And we see the patents that are being filed by the likes of Microsoft and Zoom to develop technologies that can monitor employee expressions or contributions during meetings and then assign quality scores. What is this all leading to? And this is happening across every sector of the economy: private sector, government, civil society. These technologies don't just adversely affect workers. Of course they do. They affect all of us. We saw the National Eating Disorders Association, for example, fire its Healthline staff and replace them with AI chatbots to speak to a very marginalized population. What is this really leading to? The issue isn't always about the technology, but sometimes it is. And as has been mentioned by other speakers here, oftentimes workers or those engaging with these tools are not aware that they're being surveilled. They don't know the full extent to which they're being monitored. In many jurisdictions, the right to privacy is minimal in the workplace, unless that workplace is also one's home. And there are truly inadequate disclosure requirements. But I might pause here to see what questions everyone else has. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for being so mindful of time. I didn't even have to worry about that. So I think that I will kick it off with Gabrielle, but of course, everyone feel free to also chime in on this question. And for everybody who's tuning in live, feel free to toss questions in the Q&A and we will prioritize those. So Gabrielle, I'm really curious what a just future where humans have more leisure time and do less body damaging manual labor might look like. I personally love the idea of all of us laboring less under capitalism, but not really like at the expense of justice for disempowered workers. How do we have both? And I know that's a huge question, so however you want to take that on.
Yeah, I think ensuring that workers have more say in the workplace and have more freedom and protection to define what work looks like for them is the way to ensure that there is a just future and where we have more leisure. I was recently listening to a podcast that was interviewing Brian Merchant, who has a book coming out about the Luddites, Blood in the Machine. And he was describing how textile workers before manufacturing really was like an industry, and the way that textile was produced in England were able to really determine how their day went. Like they knew they had assignments and were expected to produce a certain amount of cloth for whoever was paying them, but they were able to take care of their garden, to spend time with family, to, have downtime as they did their work. And I can imagine that a just future looks a lot like that, where we have space to spend time with our loved ones. We have time to have hobbies, to care for ourselves. I think especially like garden really like hit home for me when I heard that, especially as we hear a lot about, people aren't eating like healthy diets, people are eating out too much. And you think about if you're working an 8-hour day, you have a horrible commute to get home and you're exhausted. It's probably a lot easier to get something that is quick to eat, and maybe a nutritionist might not feel like it's the most healthy option. So I think there's a lot of ensuring that people are not treated as workers first and foremost, but treated as humans who have holistic needs. And so that might not be the answer you're looking for, but that always comes to mind in terms of ensuring that it's not a matter of our day is structured around work, but we get to determine as workers, we get to determine what our day looks like, so we can put ourselves first as humans.
Anyone else want to jump on that?
I guess I just want to mention quickly a point that Amos had made, which I think is really salient here, is that two of the harms that we're really tracking in this space have to do with the areas that we've laid out, which are social protection and the growing inequality that is driving increasing austerity in social programs around the world, and then workplace justice. And the two are really two halves of the same coin. And I think what's important about that, kind of getting towards what Gabriel was speaking about, is that in many ways, the wellness of workers is something that many employers are now invested in, seemingly, in the form of a lot of these sort of workplace wellness programs or the sharing of medical or mental health data with employers. But at the same time, I think it's really important to think about the harms that are taking place when the barriers between these two sectors are breaking down, and the ways that different social programs, for example, in the US, might track or have ways of checking up on one's employment as a way of predetermining or more likely eliminating someone's ability to obtain social welfare. And so, yeah, I guess just to say that I think it's important to say that these two issues are really, really linked. They haven't always been sort of framed that way in the media and in these conversations, but yeah, just to make that point, and a +1 to everything Gabriel said.
We have an interesting and challenging follow-up question from one of our audience members who says, the presentations seem one-sided to the extent that they are only presenting these aspects of technology as fait accompli employer domination. Labor historians have done a lot of work on forms of resistance. Is there any work on this in terms of how AI can be used, I think, as a tool for labor, for resistance or for empowerment of labor? And where can one find workers' voices on this issue? Anyone who wants to jump on that, please go ahead. Otherwise, I will call on people.
I'm certainly happy to start the conversation. Love the question. I think it's also true to say that in my previous introduction, I was cherry picking negative examples because sometimes I do, of course, come across technologies that I find less problematic or tools that I find very interesting. This is a good idea, particularly in the context of workplace safety applications, technologies that are identifying signs of fatigue. So there are other examples out there too. But what I don't always see is employers then deploying technologies for these reasons. The business case is something else. It's not, if we adopt this technology, we can offer a 4-day work week. It's, if we adopt this technology, we can lay off X number of people in order to justify the investment. And so to the question about whether workers are using AI to sort of push back, really interesting thought. And I think the answer is yes, that we have seen some sort of social media campaigns that are using generative AI to name and shame employers that are engaging in union busting tactics. Whether that is going to be contributing to a healthy information environment, though, that's a different question. But I think that you're absolutely right that there are certainly workers who are, and collectives of workers who are trying to also experiment with new technologies as well in order to put up some form of resistance. In terms of scholars who are working on these issues, I'm not familiar with any, but would love to hear names that others are more familiar with.
Thanks, Aidan. Do any of you, any of the other panelists want to speak to sort of how these technologies can be used as tools for worker empowerment?
I can jump in briefly so other folks have a chance to jump in as well. I think part of the reason why that is like the sentiment that it's sort of seen as like, oh, it's only a tool for employer domination, is the unique information asymmetry that comes about with the use of artificial intelligence, where the employer knows how much data that they're collecting and what they're intending to use that data for, as opposed to in the past where workers knew that information was being collected and they were then able to resist knowing, okay, my employer is listening to these phone calls, or, you know, this is a site for me to then bargain with the union, with the worker organization to then combat and resist this form of surveillance. where today, like workers know they're being surveilled, but it's unclear what data is being collected and how it's being used. An example of worker resistance is with rideshare drivers who know that there is surveillance in regards to what rides they accept and how that then determines what pay they will receive in the future. And so that's a lot of work on the driver's part to then keep track of that information, to keep track of whether or not they're receiving their tips, and then to push back and say like, okay, let me collect, like, let me collect with other drivers and compare notes and see like, what can we then do to outsmart the algorithm that is engaging in pay discrimination. So it's a lot more work that workers have to do now with automated surveillance and automated management as opposed to in the past. And so I think for me, it's really important to like clarify that and to uplift that so that way it's not accepting that this is the future and this is how things are going to go, but just highlighting how if we don't stop it now when we have this information and we're starting to piece together what we have at the moment, it'll be a lot more difficult in 5-10 years because the technology will change and we'll be starting again trying to collect this information.
I mean, just to build on that, I think, our own research into the app-based economy shows that there are limits to worker resistance within the confines of employer technology systems, right? So it kind of, as what Gabrielle talked about, which is, like before 2022, Uber and Lyft generally calculated fares as well as how much drivers were paid based on fixed time and mileage rates. Beginning in 2022, both companies transitioned to a dynamic pricing model that would not only take into account time and mileage, but a range of other factors that were unknown to the driver, right? So, in a lot of interviews I did with drivers, like before the 2022 pay changes, a lot of them had strategies on like, don't chase the surge, which is a way of saying like, don't chase, places in the Uber app tells you to go to because there might be a bonus there. So I think, but these strategies, effectively became outdated once Uber and Lyft changed the game and moved the goalposts, right? And moved to this kind of far more opaque model of dynamic pricing where workers really couldn't figure out how they were paid, right? And that's not to say that this new model will actually jumpstart a whole other range of strategies, but workers are always kind of playing catch up within this game, and at the end of the day, the house always wins. Kind of the broader point on like technology, I kind of take the point that it's important to not see technology as inherently harmful, and certainly I think like it's a far more nuanced picture when it comes to integrating technology into public services, where actually sometimes public services infrastructure really need resourcing and really need to be modernized. But the ways in which infrastructure is modernized is not a technical question. I think that's really kind of maybe my argument. It's also a question of values and a question of norms and policies, right? So if the framework for technology upgrades to public services is cost cutting, then you are going to see technology being integrated in ways that ultimately burden people with, as Eliza said at the beginning of her talk, like that have the least margin of refusal. But if the cornerstone of technology upgrade is inclusive social policy, then what you might actually see uses of technology that facilitate people's access to these services.
Thank you all so much. Another one of our audience members is curious, and Michael, I'm signing you up to put some links in the chat if folks want to share them. If there are examples of AI guidelines or use policies within your organizations or other organizations that are doing it right, that you all can share. Where should those who want to be ethical or learn more about being ethical go to find resources that'll point them in the right direction? Other than, I suppose, other than Eliza's report, although Eliza, this is a great opportunity for you to start by plugging that October report, where we could find it, if we could sign up somewhere to get it when it comes out. That one seems like a good start.
Yeah, thank you. I will definitely not plug at this point, but I am excited to get that into the world. But I think it really asks more questions than it answers in the sense of best AI guidelines at this point. And I think I'll just make the point too that, and I'll drop some links and some suggested resources for people interested. But in many ways, much of the legislation around the world that's going forward on best use for AI in different sectors, I think there's two important points to remember. And the first one is that in many ways, what we call today AI is really just an extension or kind of an updated version of a lot of kinds of technology that we've already been using in many ways in our work lives and elsewhere. And to think of it as this separate new thing, I think in some ways is a bit reductive and not super helpful when it comes to curtailing some of the harms that it perpetuates. And yeah, I think the second point is that creating kind of universal use guidelines. It's been really interesting to watch the process of legislation going on around the AI Act in the EU right now, for example. I understand the desire that some people have in this space for kind of like very broad overarching principles for best use. But I think, in my opinion, I would love to hear, my fellow panelists' take on this. It really doesn't make a lot of sense to talk about a particular use case of a use of automation or algorithmic decision making outside of a corresponding discussion of the actual use case that's at play and the sector in which it's being used. So, for example, when we talk about like the criminal justice sector and the use of, for example, automated decision making around determinations for parole status, that's a very particular instance that has some shared principles in general. And we talk about general civil, political, human rights. But I think it's really important to think about the specific context in which it's being used and how and in what ways its harms differ from those that take place in different sectors. And so I'm really wary personally of attempts to kind of make really broad legislation, especially right now when we're kind of have the potential to freeze in time a really particular use of violation that might, be written out of existence or become sort of irrelevant when this technology inevitably evolves. So I would just say I would, love to hear what my other panelists have to say, and I can drop some suggested resources too, but to take really careful note of how and in what ways we're talking about AI instead of just using this really kind of blanket terminology is, I think, really crucial.
I just want to point out that Leah and I have been doing these web salons for going on 2 years on a monthly cadence. And Eliza wins the award for the first time that a panelist has asked other panelists a question. So this is a momentous occasion, and passing it over to any panelist who would like to answer Eliza's question.
I agree that it's so incredibly important to be specific when speaking about AI and when thinking about like legislating or regulating AI. I remember getting feedback on a bill and talking with an advocate, and he was like, okay, this definition of algorithms includes like sorting in Excel. Like, do you want that to also be covered by this bill? And so it's so incredibly important to be specific, because we need to think about what is the root of the harm that we're trying to counter or trying to prevent from occurring in the future. And I think it's also important that we don't skip that step of being specific and defining what we mean when we say AI, because it also allows, or if we don't do that, then we could fall prey to smoke and mirrors or industry jargon, and again, miss the true root of the issue. So I agree with Eliza that instead of having if you have very broad principles, it should be about, make sure that do no harm, essentially, right? Like when you're developing or designing the system, you need to look for the potential harms and make sure that you are preventing those harms from then ending up in the final product that is then deployed. I can drop some resources as well that are a lot more broad and thinking, and more so thinking, okay, when you are thinking about making regulations, what should you be considering, as opposed to legislator, this is exactly what you need to put in the final bill or the final regulation. But the last thing I'll say is that in response to something that Eliza said that I also agree with is, it's so difficult to pass legislation in the United States that there has to be rulemaking authority then given to an expert agency that can update the regulations and the protections as the technology evolves and as the industry shifts. Because again, if we're trying to use legislation that was passed 25 years ago for the technology that we have today, those legislators had no idea what we would be dealing with today. And so in the same way, we should make sure that we're not setting up, the generation in 25 years from now up for dealing with some of the same issues that we're dealing with today.
If I can build off of some of your points, Gabrielle and Eliza. I think that legislation is eventually necessary in order to protect all workers. But in the absence of new legislation that is fit for purpose, I would like us to sort of look at what legislation we already have that maybe isn't being enforced, which could be enforced. Sometimes supervisory authorities don't have the resources to enforce existing laws that are on the book. And also some workers, and I suppose this is almost a modern form of resistance to build on the previous question, who are part of unionized workplaces have been able to engage in collective bargaining around AI and automation. Earlier this week, for example, the staff of the Financial Times negotiated an agreement with their union around terms of technology use, ensuring fair implementation, pushing for transparency in how monitoring data is collected and used, and also secured sort of not exactly a prohibition on the use of tools like ChatGPT, but at least assurances that their roles will not be replaced by these technologies. Of course, most workers are not in unionized environments and do not have the ability to be able to engage in collective bargaining, but some are. And so that might be something that as a short-term band-aid is also worth exploring a little further as to what can be mutually negotiated. To also sort of build on the previous question of modern forms of resistance, I was also thinking of a subtle form of resistance that I've seen many vendors of workplace surveillance technologies express concern about, which is that workers find ways to trick monitoring software into thinking they're more productive than they are. And this can be a very effective form of having monitoring software removed from workplaces, because suddenly there is quantitative data saying that a worker is cannot really be disciplined because they're exceeding expectations. And this is something that vendors of these tools find very difficult to challenge, because workers cotton on pretty quickly sometimes as to how things can be gamed. And so sometimes it is simply a case of that it can be a very effective, subtle act of resistance.
That reminds me of a great quote from an academic named James Ferguson, who wrote The Anti-Politics Machine, who said, "Don't ask what people should be doing, they're doing it." And with that, building on what you guys are saying about legislation, because this is something where there is some juice towards legislation, I'm curious to what extent you think that generative AI, however we define it, does this pose, what kind of risks do you think this poses in terms of automating work? Is this are these risks different in degree or kind to the kinds of risks that we saw before? Do you think there's any reason to treat this wave of talk or hype around generative AI as something that represents a a fundamental shift or not?
Maybe I'll just jump in quickly because this is in my mind and also outside my window where I'm sitting. So I'm based right now in our New York Amnesty office, which is in Times Square, and there's this massive ad campaign going on right now for the platform work company Fiverr, I think is what it's called now. And there's a campaign they're running right now that's basically, it's, workers that are saying AI took my job, and then it says below it, to the next level. So I think it's trying to build upon this real anxiety and kind of this wave of news that we've seen, and sort of like the dialogue going on with CEOs of major corporations who are using this kind of moment of attention to generative AI as a way to threaten workers, and a way to kind of provide the pretext for talking about worker insecurity in a way that I think in some ways, to go back to your question, Michael, there are real gains and real sort of benefits from some of these automated tools that some of us already use in some form, whether it's the extensions that are written into our, email writing, or the automation and calendar tools. But I think more importantly, what I'm worried about at this point is that this is an opportunity for workers to lose more power just because of kind of the narrative case power of these tools and the ways that I think people misunderstand them. And in some ways, what I fear might happen is that generative AI in its current form is sort of almost is an opportunity to like Trojan horse in kind of more restrictions and more breaking down of traditional worker protections, kind of under a pretext of a tool that we don't exactly know how it works, and the productivity that it brings to a workplace is sort of, at least at best, sort of under major question. So I think I would just, start off by saying that, and I'm really glad that none of you, at least I hope, have had to see that 50-foot ad today, but that's the one that's in my mind right now.
Any further thoughts on generative AI in light of this conversation, Amos?
I mean, I think like the story here, the other story here, which in some ways is the more important one, but also will probably or almost certainly receive less scrutiny and attention, is the kind of long degradation of labor protections and laws in the United States, right? I think this period of AI hype and acceleration and uptake is also coinciding with several very worrying trends and stagnation in US labor law. So the minimum wage in the United States has not been updated since 2008. There is very lax enforcement when it comes to employment misclassification, and never mind the tech industry, but since as early as the 1980s, a lot of employers have been outsourcing services to contract workers in ways that have had a downward pressure on wages and benefits, as well as created like enormous potential for abuse, such as things like wage theft, right? So I think the uptake of technology in the workplace is kind of is coming up in this area where labor laws are on very shaky footing. The PRO Act, which is one of the most progressive pieces of legislative proposals to come from any administration in a while, is effectively dead in Congress, and there is kind of not a lot of movement, certainly at the federal level, right? So I think that's is actually a really major source of concern when you think about how these technologies might be integrated into the workplace in ways that further subvert protections for workers. I think that the EU provides an interesting counterpoint. They are locked in their own battle around the Platform Work Directive, which is, a directive like designed to which is a law designed to harmonize like EU laws around protections for digital platform workers. And it's also very telling that in the directive, like they give a lot of weight to collective bargaining and union protections, which have become like, a very, we've seen a lot of like great exercises of of labor and union power here in the United States, but like one wonders if that's kind of, it doesn't really actually show the crumbling facade of unionization and union protections in this country. So yeah, a lot to think about there.
I think briefly I'll just add, there's my concern with generative AI in the workplace is like an over-reliance on claims that haven't yet been proved, or like we don't know the actual validity of some of the claims that have been made. I think Aiden named that earlier, of like these vendors are making claims about the technology and it's not clear that the technology can actually do that. So if we take Hollywood as an example, there is an assertion that writers will be replaced by generative AI, and the first pass of the script will be created by an artificial intelligence, a generative AI. But when you think about how scripts are written, it's not a matter of looking at every movie in a certain genre and then spitting something together and then spitting something out, right? So that's the concern that I have. And I think, especially when we think about benefits as well, and the work that Amos mentioned, is the concern of, okay, we're just going to introduce this technology and whatever happens, happens. But we're talking about whether or not people have food to feed their families. We're talking about like the means that folks are able then to have a livelihood. And so for me, I think the hype and the claims I'm not impressed by, but I'm concerned about what is going to be the impact if there is just a complete and total reliance on this technology.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, this is so great. We have about 5 minutes left. And so I think I'm going to do a bit of a round robin, asking everybody, what is, as the US government considers AI regulations, what is the one thing that's at the top of your list? Or if you can't do that, what is a thing that is at the top of your list for them to do to ensure that that this technology is human rights forward and for the betterment of everybody, not just big corporations. And maybe we'll go Eliza, Gabrielle, Aiden, and Amos.
Wow, thank you for that question. I don't really know where to start. There's obviously a lot that comes to mind, a lot that keeps me up at night. But I think maybe where I'll start is just by saying that most prominently above all, I guess what I keep thinking about is the fact that because we are kind of in this moment of a little bit of a Wild West when it comes to a lot of the companies that are building off of automation and releasing new tools, whether it's facial recognition enabled fare evasion tools, which are now emerging market, or in the criminal justice sector, a lot of these like smaller AI companies are now starting to sell tools to different states and municipalities and sort of flying under the radar when it comes up against these like sort of bigger, more nationally or internationally known entities. And so I guess my concern in some ways, one of the major ones, is just thinking about, in relation to the tech regulation conversation, also thinking about reining in big businesses in general, and thinking about the business model and the patterns of extraction and racist colonization and theft of resources that have made this current economic moment possible, and to really build in the question of what building towards a framework of restorative justice or reparations might look like, both in the context of our current economic moment and also within the current moment of the tech sector. Because and this is to the last kind of point of generative AI, none of these tools would exist without the years and years of data and information and labor that we all collectively have fed it. And usually the most marginalized people have been, you know, unknowingly or knowingly being forced to give up more in order to make these tools possible. And so first and foremost, yeah, I guess I would think about how to think about tech regulation within the framework of broader economic regulation towards human rights. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I would have two things that I would want for the government to keep in mind. One, that this is a new medium for an old problem or an old aim. And so we know what it looks like to deny folks benefits. We know what it looks like when workers' rights are being undermined. And so really approaching it from that angle, as opposed to this is a new tech thing, so we need a tech solution for this tech problem. And the second thing that I would implore is to really, for the government to invest in experts at that intersection. So in my case, it would be the intersection of technology and labor. In like other instances, it might be civil rights and labor, civil rights and technology. Really just making sure that there's in-house expertise, so that way legislators or policymakers aren't relying on vendors to tell them how to be regulated.
My perhaps provocative recommendation would be there should be no exemption for small businesses. And I mean this in two senses, both in terms of those deploying it and those developing it. At Coworker, we do a lot of research on what we call little tech. Most of the 650 surveillance products we explore are developed by companies with 50 or fewer employees. So they evade the scrutiny that big tech companies have. And unlike the larger firms like Oracle that do some forms of risk assessment on their products, a lot of these smaller vendors don't. So I would say just because the revenue of some of these developers is a little on the lower side, don't give them an exemption from complying with this legislation. Look at Midjourney, it has 25 staff. You can do a lot with within the context of AI with quite limited resources. And similarly, these tools are often being deployed by small and medium-sized businesses as well, because they tend to be sometimes less trusting of their staff than larger corporations even. Secondly, disclosure requirements. We definitely need to know, the workers should have the right to know what data is being collected about them and what is being done with that data.
I think it comes as no surprise that I think the first thing I would say is that universal social protection needs to be the guiding framework for the way we start restructuring public services with technology. This really means universal access to benefits that are provided not based on means testing or targeting people based on their level of perceived poverty, but proactively provided to people regardless of their wealth and socioeconomic status. So, and I think the second kind of actually closely interrelated kind of principle is strengthening collective bargaining, especially in countries that are mired in legislative dysfunction, such as notably the United States. Where we are going to see a lot of meaningful resistance is from workers themselves. And if we enable workers to have voice and power in the development and the uptake of these technologies, the more likely we have a shot at these technologies actually working for society rather than against it.
Guys, thank you all so much for an absolutely fascinating conversation. And a huge thank you for just taking the time to be on this panel. We will have this up on the Emerging Tech for Activists website as soon as we can. And just really excited to see where this conversation goes going forward. Leah, any final words?
Just really grateful for the conversation and the push towards making this a much more equitable transition than it's looking like right now. Thank you all so much for your time.